الرحمن الرحيم. إذا زلزلت الأرض زلزالها وأخرجت الأرض أثقالها وقال الإنسان ما لها يومئذ تحدث أخبارها بأن ربك أوحى لها يومئذ يصدر الناس أشتاتا ليروا أعمالهم فمن يعمل مثقال ذرة خيرا يرى ومن يعمل مثقال ذرة شرا يرى. صلوات.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. صلوات.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد لم يولد لم يكن كفوا أحد.
الرجيم. بفضل الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله والحمد حقه كما يستحقه حمدا كثيرا. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. اللهم لعن أول ظالم ظلم حق محمد وآل محمد وآخر تابع له على ذلك. اللهم لعن العصابة التي جاهدت الحسين وشايعت وبايعت وتابعت على قتله. اللهم لعنهم جميعا. ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلق الله أجمعين محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. Of the commandments that were given by the fifth holy Imam, Al-Imam Muhammad ibn Ali al-Baqir salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayh, to his companion Jabir al-Ja'fi. There were 5 commandments that he gave, but we will address the first one. And that was, he said to him, "In dhulimta fala tadhlim," that if you are oppressed, do not oppress. Before we try to understand what the hadith is saying, we need to understand what the subject that is being discussed. Firstly, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We need to understand what the subject is that's been discussed here before we can proceed in the matter. So firstly, when we look at the word that says oppression, what does it mean? What does it mean? What does dhulm mean? If you look at mankind and the way humans function, what is the most foremost, or the head, or the most important main point of a human that determines whether a human is a good human or a bad human. A lot of people use different ways to measure humanity. Some people might measure them by their strength, by their speed, by their characteristics, by their attributes that they have, by God-given abilities, by their traits. However, the thing that is used to measure humanity or measure human beings, and the way you will always use, whether you look at everything else when it comes to how you function and deal with people, is the aql of the human, which is their intellect. And when we speak about a person that is an oppressor, this aql, this light, imagine it's turned off. There is no aql, there's no intellect. An oppressor is not someone that is someone that doesn't have any aql, doesn't have intellect whatsoever. And this is what makes them oppress. Because in order to understand the reality of what oppression is, and we comprehend it from the beginning, this is the only way we can end what oppression is. And the reality of what oppression is when you cross the boundary of what's right. It's when you transgress. You move from what's right to what's wrong. This is what oppression is. This is what dhulm is. And that light, as I mentioned, of intellect extinguishes in the one that oppresses. And that's why we need to know and we need to understand what is right and what is wrong in order for us not to oppress. In fact, the word oppression or oppress must be removed from our vocabulary. It's something we should not even walk in that direction, something that we should abstain or avoid at all cases. So when the Imam says, in dhulimt, if you are oppressed, he says, فَلَا تَظْلَمْ, do not oppress. You know, sometimes, for example, someone steals something from you. Someone takes, say for example, a watch from your house. If you go to their house and you see that watch, you can take it back. He stole it from you, you can steal it back if you want to look at it in that manner. That's permissible. You took back what's yours. But if someone oppresses you, you can't oppress them. You can't transgress. For example, if someone does something where they transgress the boundaries, I can't transgress my boundaries. In Islam, there's no such thing as overkill. For example, if someone hits me, I'm allowed to hit him with the same way he hit me in the same manner. Precisely. No more, no less. Or less, sorry, but no more. So even to the point where Amir al-Mu'mineen, because I want you to think about this. When Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam says to Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, he says to him, يَقْتُلُكَ أَشْقَى الْأَوَّلِينَ وَالْآخِرِينَ شَقِيقُ عَاقِرِ نَاقَةِ ثَمُودٍ. That the one that will kill you, he says to Amir al-Mu'mineen, is ashqa. When you use the word ashqa, we usually, shaqi in Arabic, we mean is someone that's not fortunate. It also means someone that is wicked and ruthless. Ashqa means the most wicked, the most ruthless. Al-awwaleen wal-akhirin. Who was that? Abdul Rahman ibn Muljam or Ibn Muljam al-Muradi. Alayhi la'inullah. And I can freely curse him because everyone curses him. There's no one that actually likes al-Muradi. So someone like Iblis, you can say la'an. This is how bad this person was. No one likes him. He is the worst of the worst. Yet when Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib deals with him, he says, my son Hassan, if I live, فَعَلَيَّ بِالرَّجُلِ, I'm the one that deals with you. But if I die, فَضَرْبَةٌ بِضَرْبَةٍ. He struck me once, you strike him once. Who's this? The worst of God's creation. Then he says, وَإِيَّاكُمْ وَالْمُثْلَةِ. Afwan, he says, وَلَا تُمَثَّلُوا بِالرَّجُلِ. وَلَا تُمَثَّلُوا بِالرَّجُلِ. I'll explain وَلَا تُمَثَّلُوا بِالرَّجُلِ. Do you remember recently the case with the Australian SAS soldier, Ben Robert Smith, and where they were celebrating with the prosthetic limb in the pub? And they call these trophies that they take from their kills. You know, what they used to actually do is when they kill someone, you know, sometimes they would scalp them. They'd take their scalp, they'd cut it off. Sometimes they would cut their ears, or even in the Jahiliyyah, Hind, the liver eater, the mother of Muawiyah, was known as what? When Rasulullah in the ziyarah where Imam Sadiq alayhi salam ziyarah Ashura, he says about Muawiyah, وَابْنُ آكِلَةِ الْأَكْبَادِ, the son of the liver eater. His mother used to eat the liver of the enemy when they were killed, and she would get their ears and their nose, and she would make necklaces and bracelets using them. This was what they would call al-muthla, when they would mutilate a body. After they kill it, they mutilate it. And then he says, وَلَا يُمَثَّلُ بِالرَّجُلِ وَإِنِّي سَمِعْتُ حَبِيبي رسول الله يقول وَإِيَّاكُمْ وَالْمُثْلَةِ وَلَوْ بِالْكَلْبِ الْعَقُورِ. That do not even what? Mutilate a what? One says al-kalb al-aqur is a crippled dog, and another one says a rabid dog. A dog, could you imagine a dog that is crippled or rabid? And this is before the RSPCA. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam was saying, do not even mutilate this if it's dead. Do not even mutilate it to that point. And this is Abdul Rahman bin Muljam. So this is the problem with oppression. I need to remember that even the slightest oppression will be brought to justice. Before we explain what oppression and types of oppression, the slightest will be brought to judgment. Where the hadith Qudsi that's mentioned, An Amir al-Mu'mineen says, وَعِزَّتِي وَجَلَالِي. When Allah says, وَعِزَّتِي وَجَلَالِي, He's saying, by my might, and by my dignity, by my honor, Allah is saying, by my majesty, لا يجوزني ظلم ظالم. That on the day of judgment, listen to this, he's not saying Muslim, non-Muslim, no oppressor will pass me on the day of judgment. No oppressor, he says, وَلَوْ كَفٌ بِكَفٍ. So even if you slap someone, you know, sometimes people, they like to sahsah to other people without their permission. See that, it's coming back to you. And it's not going to come back to you in the nice way. That you took from someone without their permission, you hit them without their permission. You know this person is not worthy for you to even touch them, and you touch them. Walau, he says, mashatun bikaf. Even if you were to touch something and no one permits you to touch it. You go and touch something, someone says, I don't like you to touch the thing that's theirs, and you go touch it. They're going to take their haqq from you on the day of judgment. Something's that small, Allah Azza wa Jal will bring it onto the day of judgment. He says all the way in the narration, حَتَّى لَا تَبْقَى لِأَحَدٍ عَلَى أَحَدٍ مَظْلِمَةٍ. Until the rest of the narration, I don't want to read the whole thing, that on the day of judgment, no one will owe anyone. All debts will be settled. And no one will pass. What is it that no one will pass? Abu Abdullah al-Sadiq alayhi salam says, في قول الله عز وجل إن ربك لبالمرصاد. You've heard that saying, إن ربك لبالمرصاد. We generally say لبالمرصاد is that God will take vengeance. That God is the one that takes revenge. لبالمرصاد is more than this. The Imam says لبالمرصاد. He says قال قنطرة على الصراط لا يجوزها عبد بمظلمة. You know what a qantara is? Like a little bridge, a pass. a pass that you'll be passing on the Sirat, on your way to heaven, because there's stations on heaven. He said, see this qantara, this bridge or this pass. No one will pass if they have one bit of oppression. Their debts have to be settled before they pass. All your debts have to be settled. Okay. So what are the types of oppression? Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam says, Ala wa inna dhulm thalatha. There are three types of oppression. The first one, he says, فَظُلْمٌ لَا يُغْفَرْ. An oppression, a dhulm, that will not be forgiven. That's the first type of dhulm. And then he says, وَظُلْمٌ لَا يُتْرَكْ. And a dhulm that will not let go. Allah will not let it go. And it won't be able to pass by. The first one will not be forgiven at all. The second one is not going to be overlooked. And the third one, he says, وَظُلْمٌ مَغْفُورٌ لَا يُطْلَبْ. The third type is an oppression that is forgiven and will not be asked about. So obviously he says the three types, then when he explains them, he explains the first, then the third, then the second. So أما, he says, فأما الظلم الذي لا يغفر فالشرك بالله قال الله تعالى إن الله لا يغفر أن يشرك به. The dhulm, when Luqman says to his son, يا بني لا تشرك بالله إن الشرك لظلم عظيم. الشرك بالله is a dhulm that does not get forgiven. Do you know why? I'll give you an idea what shirk is. This is something you can relate to. Have you ever seen when someone has helped someone all their life and done so much good? Imagine you, I want to apply this to you. Think of someone that you've helped from the beginning of their life. It could be a child, be a person. For years you've helped them and looked after them. When they reach, and this has happened to people, when they reach an age of maturity and someone asks them, who do you indebt your life to? And then they'll name someone other than you. Completely. Like you don't even exist. They'll mention one person, second person, third person, fourth person, and you're not even mentioned. This we call oppression. Because they're not saying what's right. And this happens with a lot of things. So imagine when it comes to the creator of the heavens and the earth. If you do not recognize that he created you, why is it an oppression? Because you'll never recognize what's haq. If you notice atheists, they're the most, ridiculous people you can listen to. I like to listen to a lot of atheists. I just like listening to stuff they say. I was recently listening to Brian Cox, who was a physicist. When it comes to physics, he's amazing. I like listening to all his theories when it comes and his understanding of physics and that. But then he'll say something and I said, my mind will be blown. I cannot believe, I swear not even a 3-year-old will say what he just said. He said that dolphins are more intelligent than human beings. This is what he actually said. He said, however, dolphins haven't advanced. When he was asked why haven't they advanced, they go, well, they can't use electricity and water. And I was thinking, this is so... I couldn't even... This is one of the most moronic statements I've heard. And for him to even make that statement is a joke. This is the way that they think. They don't have any intellect whatsoever. They make ridiculous arguments for that reason. So this is the greatest oppression. And then when he says... فأما الظلم الذي وأما الظلم الذي يغفر. He goes to number 3. فظلم العبد نفسه عند بعض الهنات. بعض الهنات, it means the person that oppresses themselves عند بعض الهنات means, sometimes where someone does a sin but it's not deliberate. Someone falls into making a mistake, someone makes an error, someone makes an error of judgment, a lesser sin. Allah Azza wa Jal will forgive that. Not someone that's muta'ammid bil masi. Not someone that goes to the RSL and sits on the pokies. Not someone that sits and has something to drink, is alcoholic, an open alcoholic. But someone that falls into a situation where they commit a sin. Something happens and they are overcome by the situation and they commit a sin. These kind of things, Allah forgives them, and He mentions this. He says in the Quran, إِن تَجْتَنِبُوا كَبَائِرَ مَا تُنْهَوْنَ عَنْ نُكَفِّرْ عَنْكُمْ سَيِّئَاتِكُمْ. If you avoid the greater sins, Allah will overlook the lesser sins. Someone goes out of their way to avoid. Finally, he gets to the third one. وَأَمَّا الظُّلْمُ الَّذِي لَا يُتْرَكْ فَظُلْمَ الْعِبَادِ بَعْضُهُمْ بَعْضًا. Once again, this is to emphasize the third type is those that oppress each other. Allah doesn't let this go. This all has to be settled. So what are the effects of oppression? The first effect, Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam says, الظلم يزل القدم. يزل القدم means it will make your foot slip on the sirat. It means on the Day of Judgment. On the Day of Judgment, you're on your way to paradise, it will make you slip last second and fall into hell. This is what oppression does. It moves people. Even in the dunya, you'll see them, they'll turn away from God. They're oppressed, they'll turn away from God at the right time. And then he says, وَيَسْلُبُ النَّعَمْ. It removes blessings. Sometimes you ask people, hold on, people go, why has this musibah befallen us? Why has this befallen us? Why has that tragedy befallen us? Why is this happening to us? Some of the cases, you'll turn around and you go, hold on. When was the last time one of you was praying? When was the last time you fasted in Shahr Ramadan? I've been to many countries that you go to in Shahr Ramadan and you can count on your fingers who's fasting. Someone says, oh, I had a nosebleed this morning. Someone says, my elbow's hurting me. They've got a million reasons why they don't want to fast. And then all of a sudden, Allah Azza wa Jal starts to remove the blessings. The third thing that he says, Amir al-Mu'mineen, وَيُهْلِكُ الْأُمَمِ. That nations are destroyed with oppression. Because everyone becomes corrupt. Look at, for example, in the world that you live in. When anything goes wrong, everyone is complicit in this oppression. Everyone, you think this person's supposed to have half a brain, and then you find out they're a twit. They follow whatever they hear, and they just conform. This is how you have tyrants rule the world. However, when it comes to oppression, Allah Azza wa Jal does not like silence when it comes to oppression. Allah says in the Quran, لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء من القول. Allah Azza wa Jal does not like for people to make anything that's bad public. Any crime you see or something wrong, someone does. If I, for example, see someone drinking in their house, I shouldn't make it public. This is a form of ghib. This is a form of backbiting. But then God gives an exception in the Quran. He says, إِلَّا مَنْ ظُلِمْ, except the one that is oppressed. Someone that has been wronged. So if we can say, some of the ulama say, because it says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبْ, they say it's possible to mean that Allah yuhib, whoever makes things public when there's oppression. And as we look, we're moving closer to these are where we start the events of the days of Fatimiyya, commemoration of the martyrdom of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. One of the things Fatima did is she made her oppression public. If she had not, she wouldn't have exposed the criminals. The munafiqs that committed these crimes would never have been exposed if she did not make it public. Look in Australia, for example. You know, in Australia, how many saints does the Catholic Church have in Australia? Does anyone know? Anyone? They have one. You know who the only saint, the only person that was canonized in Australia was Mary MacKillop. You've heard of Mary MacKillop? Mary MacKillop became famous. Why? She was actually kicked out of the church because she was a whistleblower. She used to report what was taking place in the church. You know, all the indecent acts that were taking place. She exposed it. Back then you weren't allowed to expose that stuff. Shh, keep it yourself tumma. As in our community, it happens too. When someone does something, do that. Oh, cover up for him, cover up for him. Keep the animal amongst the people. Just keep it quiet and pack it away. That's what they used to do. But eventually they canonized her. They accepted what she did was right. And then they tried to erase that from the records. They said that was only a rumor. That's not the reason why she was kicked out. The thing is, if we remain silent about oppression, what happens? It augments. You remember the saying in Arabic, they say, Alulu la far'an min far'anak. Alu mala'at hada yarudni. You've heard that before. There's a saying that they said to Pharaoh, or Pharaoh, as we'd say, because when we say Pharaoh, a lot of people try and say Pharaoh was Ramses II. We don't know. We don't know who Pharaoh was, whether Pharaoh, because Ramses II was a pharaoh of the 19th dynasty. We don't know if it was from the 18th, 17th. We don't know where this, the dynasty this Pharaoh was. But what we do know is of the stories they say that this Pharaoh was not, who? Was not someone that succeeded the throne. You had some kings that died without children. This guy was actually an undertaker that moved to the top. Do you know how he moved to the top? What he did is he went to the graveyard, he put a fence around it, and he stood at the door and he said, you need to pay 1 gold coin for each body you need to bury. What did the people do? No one said, what are you doing here? Shu dakhalak, what's your story? What do people do? They just conform. They pay 1 gold coin. And that's what they did. And they all conformed, and what happened? Eventually he got to the point where he started getting rich and stronger and stopping people from doing certain things. People say, let it go, until he said, Ana rabbukum al-a'la, until they get to the point where they believe themselves to be deities. Now, some people claim to oppose oppression. Now, I was talking to one of my friends recently, and this friend's a white Australian, right-wing Christian. And I mentioned to him about how the state of the world was in the 1930s. In 1933, when Hitler first began to persecute the Jews, 1933, okay? In 1936, 3 years later, okay, who hosted the Olympic Games? Does anyone know? Huh? It was hosted in, that's right, it was hosted in, was it Berlin? It was Berlin, not Munich. So I was waiting for you to get it right. It was hosted in Berlin in 1936. How many countries boycotted that Olympics? Have a guess. None, Ahsan. No country boycotted the Olympics. However, the United States boycotted Moscow Olympics in 1980, and Russia boycotted the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics. When something's to their personal favor, they will boycott it. However, everyone liked Hitler. The Americans loved Hitler. They were okay with Hitler persecuting the Jews. Until Hitler started to kill off the Jews. And after the great tragedy happened, what happened? They said, all right, we'll punish someone else for what we did. And in order to make people fall in line and do this, they justify it. They each pat each other on the back. And they allow it. And this is how oppression happens. This is how oppression happens. And that's why, when someone was talking to me about current events, I told him, brother, I still haven't recovered from 20 years ago. The Iraq War. When they say a hospital was destroyed, go look how many hospitals were destroyed in the Iraq War. 1.3 million people were killed. And we'll go, well, what about protests? There was over 30 million people in the protests during the Iraq War. Did you know that? I don't know if you remember, any of you remember 20 years ago when George Walker Bush came to Sydney? Does anyone remember? They closed off the road from the airport and Go look this up. You don't believe me. All the way, when they went to Canberra, they had military personnel, soldiers, with an order to shoot anyone, snipers, to shoot anyone on suspicion. If you suspect someone is not, this is Australia you're talking about, not some foreign country, to shoot anyone you suspect, everyone stayed at home. You might have had someone with an itchy trigger finger, someone that was playing what's Counter-Strike back then. It wasn't Call of Duty. Would have been playing Counter-Strike and has been waiting for the pink mist all this time. And my first opportunity to see it. This is what happens. And it hasn't changed. But what you need to understand is what you have done. Because sometimes we might look at countries like this. You might look at the Zionist entity and look at what the alaikum assalam and their masters and all these people and the crimes that they commit, but look at yourself. Maybe I don't have a country to rule. I can't do what Saddam does, or I can't do what all these other tyrants do because I have nothing. There are people that are tyrants where in their own home. One narration, and before I mention it, well, for example, I get a lot of situations where a guy will drive a woman nuts just so she can stand down on her dowry and ask for a divorce. You get this situation where he says, I don't want to divorce her, I'm waiting for her to ask so I can forego the dowry. So they will torment her. Abi Hamza al-Thamali narrates on Abi Ja'far, Imam al-Baqir. Imam Baqir alayhi salam says to Abi Hamza al-Thamali, on my father's deathbed, on Ali ibn al-Husayn's deathbed, he grabbed me and brought me close and he gave me his commandments. Of the commandments, he said, Ya bunay, oh my son, my dear son, Iyaka wa dhulm, Iyaka wa dhulma man la yajidu alayka nasiran illa Allah. Beware of oppressing the one that has no one to help them except Allah. Sometimes you might oppress someone, but this person has someone to help them. Sometimes you oppress someone that they have absolutely no one. I don't know, I stopped watching footages of what's happening overseas because I think I'm going to have a stroke or a heart attack if I watch anything anymore. But there was a boy, he was walking in the street and he was saying, Wain kun ya Arab? Where are the Arabs? And then he said, Hasbi Allah alaykum. I shuddered when he said this. Imagine he's saying that Allah, Hasbi Allah, that Allah, I rely upon him to get back at you. So everyone that didn't look at this, everyone that had the ability to make something and do something, he has put his affairs in the hands of God. This is enough to make me shake. Because if he has placed his affairs in the hands of God, Allahu Akbar, what the return is going to be. But as usual, no one answers. All I remembered was on the day of Ashura, when Zainab alayhi salam, right at the last moments, where they were about to kill Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, you know what she said? She came out and she said, Ama fiikum Muslim? Is there not a Muslim amongst you? This is something for you to even consider. Even today, I was talking about men being oppressed, or oppressing women, but even today, women are oppressing men. Same thing in a country where a man has no rights, or barely any rights, where a woman will take the child and then she'll make enough because she has an issue with him personally. And I'm not talking about you. So if I get a woman that messages me later, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the women that do this. So if you message me, you're one of those. The woman, that what she does to the husband, and I see this, she says because he wasn't good to her, she forbids him from seeing his children. And I ask her, was he bad to his kids? She says he wasn't good to me. I said, no. Was he bad to his kids? How do you prevent him from his kids? This is oppression in a country where he can't do anything. He has absolutely no legs to stand on. Or you see situations where a woman will have an observer to watch over her husband when he's with his child. This is also another form of oppression. There was a ruler, and this was a king in the region of the north of Khurasan, in Khurasan, in the area of Naishapur. And it was a king who had entered the villages, and you know when a rulership comes in, they oppress the people, just as you see from 1948. And I'll give that as an example. When they walked in, they were oppressing the people. They come and lived in their houses, and sometimes they would live with you, sometimes they would kick you out and not let you back in. So this king came in and put his soldiers inside the people's houses. And I remember one Palestinian wrote an article, and this person, I swear I kept cursing this guy for 2 weeks, because he was praising his father, because his father was a spineless coward. His father was actually saying we have to learn to be good to our occupants, the people who have invaded us. And he said that we have to coexist. Someone's invaded your house. Just a disclaimer. If anyone thinks that we as Muslims do not believe in a 2, 3, whatever, 5-state solution, no. We believe everyone has to live in there. Everyone, a Muslim, a Christian, a Jew, an atheist, anyone can live in this country. But what we believe, the people that live in this country, the people that are the ones that elect who rules them. Not someone just puts someone to rule above them. This is our issue. If they decide we're happy, if the Palestinian people say, listen, we're happy living in this open air prison, you can all go to hell, leave us alone, then there you have to all be quiet. It's none of your business. Adi, as they say. But that's not the situation. These people are calling for assistance from others. Now, when this king entered this village, his soldiers were staying in the houses of the people. One woman came to call the king and said she wanted to enter the throne room, and she said to the court of the king, and she said that your soldiers are in my house. I have young girls in the house, and we have to stay dressed. And your soldiers are young men. How can I trust them in my house? And he said to her, did you not read the Quran, the verse in the Quran that says, إِنَّ الْمُلُوكِ إِذَا دَخَلُوا قَرْيَةً أَفْسَدُوهَا وَجَعَلُوا أَعِزَّةَ أَهْلِهَا أَذِلَّةً وَكَذَلِكَ يَفْعَلُونَ. He said that when the kings enter a city, they ruin it and they render the honored or the dignified people of it, like they make the honored people into humiliated people. They abase them. They bring them down. Have you not seen this? That it says this in the Quran? So in other words, he was trying to tell her this is the way it is. You have to accept it being this way. So she responded, have you not read in the same surah, Surah An-Naml, a few more verses as you go along? It says, فَتِلْكَ بُيُوتُهُمْ خَاوِيَةً. So the houses became desolate. She says, بِمَا ظَلَمُوا إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَةً لِقَوْمٍ يَعْلَمُونَ. That eventually the houses became desolate. This is a sign for all those. Do you remember when the president of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, made a statement where he said that Israel will eventually vanish from the pages of history, and then everyone said they'd be wiped from the map, even though he actually said they'll be vanished from the pages of history. You know something, and it's something you have to always think about, that this is inevitable. I remember one of the ulama said to me something in 1996. He said to me, Saddam, this were his exact words, Saddam will be tortured and killed like he tortured and killed. 9 years later, it happened. So I saw this alim again. I said, how did you know? And did you have ilm of something? You know, using the words of Sid Hassan, it says, Mush am najm. You know, basically he said, I wasn't giving you what? I'm not a soothsayer. He said, this is sunnatul hayat. I'm not telling you, this is the sunnah. The rules of this world, the way the world functions, every tyrant will fall. But the worse they do, the worse they fall. You look at Benito Mussolini, what happened to him? They took him and his wife, they ripped off all their clothes, they mutilated their bodies, and they hung them in the city. Saddam was hung and then they buried him. His body was dug up and dogs ate his body. This is how his life ended. Who would have believed Saddam was going to fall? Those that lived that time would never. I never believed Saddam would fall. I never believed that I'd be able to visit the shrine of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. This is how we used to think Saddam was going to live forever. But the rules of life, look at history, all the civilizations. أين الفراعنة أين الفراعنة وأبناء الفراعنة. Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen says, where are the pharaohs and their sons? Where are the kings and their sons? Every civilization falls. Every civilization rises and falls. Doesn't matter who it is. And this civilization will fall. This is what will happen. This will fall. And you will see it fall. When? Allahul Alam. But it will fall. Because when you oppress, eventually this is what takes place. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal for the main thing in the dunya that we should always ask for before anything else. We ask Allah to hasten the reappearance of our master Al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan. Solutions are all with him. We ask Allah to grant us the opportunity to serve him, to stand beneath his standard and to be martyred by his side. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. والأرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات والأرواح موتانا جميعا ولقضاء الحوائج وقبول الأعمال وشفاء المرضى وغفران الذنوب وتعجيل الفرج وحسن العاقبة. رحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة مع الصلوات.